Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Independent Book Day Week chat with Helen Mortimer, who is the author of one of my favourite kids' books, Omar, the Bees, and me. So, thank you so much, Helen, for joining us. Really appreciate
Thank you for having me.
So, just to start with, could you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, what you do?
Yes, of course. Yeah. So my name's Helen, and I am a freelance editor and writer. I haven't always been freelance. I started off working in publishing companies in-house, and I think I was drawn to publishing because I did geography at university, which was probably quite an odd choice, not really leading to any specific career. But all through growing up, I loved reading, and that continued whilst I was at university. And so when it came to the time to think about what kind of area I wanted to try and get my first job in, I think I was probably influenced by the fact that my father was an editor on the Times, and my mum was a reception class teacher. So the kind of combination of the editorial and the sort of working with children or for children, I think, looking back at it now, I think that those were quite big influences. And so I got my first job as an editorial secretary, because that tended to be the route into publishing when I started in the late 80s. Publishers didn't tend to have formalized recruitment schemes or anything like that. So I did my typing, dictation, and shorthand course, and then got a job for a small independent publisher in London. And that was, it was great because it was my first job. It was in London. It was all very exciting. And then that small publisher got taken over, which is quite a feature of the publishing industry, that there are lots of takeovers all the time, smaller companies being taken over by larger ones. So the company that I worked for was independent and called Unwin Hyman, and it was bought by HarperCollins. So fortunately, we all got transferred to Collins, those of us who worked at Unwin Hyman. So we kept our jobs, and obviously were therefore part of a much bigger company. And at that stage, I was working in non-fiction, in children's non-fiction or educational books.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. So that's how you started in the book industry.
Yeah.
When you were working in the publishing industry, do you have the most memorable book that you worked with whilst you were in publishing?
Yeah. So, excuse me. It was at HarperCollins that I moved from educational titles to children's books, which was my, real dream to do that.
Yeah.
And I worked at HarperCollins, again, that was on non-fiction for children, but it was still in the children's, what they call trade publishing rather than school books publishing. So those books, although they were such fun to work on, they're not the kinds of books that really stay in your heart. So I think it wasn't until I started working on picture books when I was at a company called David Bennett Books, and then I moved to Simon & Schuster, and then most recently at Oxford University Press. So the book that I probably would pick as my most memorable title when I was at OUP was one of the children's classics that we worked on and produced beautiful new illustrated editions. So we did a new edition of Pippi Longstocking, and that was illustrated by Lauren Child. So I got to work with Lauren, which was amazing. We did a new edition of Olga to Polga, which is written by Michael Bond of Paddington fame, but this was a series about a little guinea pig. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but
no, but it sounds like something my little boy would enjoy.
yeah, it's really gorgeous. And we did a new edition of that, which was illustrated by Catherine Rayner, who does beautiful, beautiful animals in watercolour. But I think my absolute favourite was we did an edition of The Wind in the Willows, and we worked with David Roberts. You'll know his work. He's done the Ada Twist Scientist series and the Rosie
Yeah.
Revere, engineer. I think his first picture book was Dirty Bertie. That's what kind of launched his
Love
career. Yeah.
that.
And David, his artwork is incredible because he does a lot of research. So obviously The Wind in the Willows is set in the kind of Edwardian sort of era. So he researched all of the clothes and the decor, the interior decor in Toad's home, and Ratty and Mole's little burrows, and the characters are all quite anthropomorphized and they wear clothes. So, you know, it was just beautifully done. And there are some illustrators that you work with when they do their roughs before they go to final artwork. The roughs are really sketchy, and you have to have a bit of a leap of faith to kind of imagine what the color artwork is going to be like, which is quite joyous in itself. But with David, he was so meticulous. He almost had like this kind of architectural approach, and he would do the most beautiful line drawings that when you would place them in the designer would place them in the document and then await the finished color work, then it was almost as if he was just coloring in what he'd done, because the roughs themselves were so beautiful and so neat and wonderfully drawn.
Illustrations.
Yeah, marvelous illustrations. And I think he did fashion illustration as a student, and then he started working for a milliner, like a very high-end milliner in London, and he actually, you know, made hats. And then it wasn't until later on that he knew, I think when his siblings started having children, he really wanted to work in children's books. He got really inspired by that. And he's just the most lovely man, really humble, really, you know, supremely talented, but just a really kind, thoughtful person. So yeah, I think that was probably, and it was a long project to work on as well. It took the best part of a year, because it's, I forget what the page extent was, but probably like 300, just over 300 pages.
There's loads and loads of illustrations and
loads of illustrations. Yeah.
Amazing. I love it when you've got a book, like say you can remember that vividly, and you say, looking at the illustrations, you can see the work he did in it. Because I've got that book somewhere in my house. I'm not quite sure where it is, but
yes,
I love classic children's books as well. I'm a huge fan of the classics.
Yeah.
The books I've read as I was growing up as a child, so I would love to encourage my little boy to listen to them too. So
yeah,
brilliant. What inspired you then to go from publishing into writing your own books?
Well, it's not a sort of massive step really, because if you work in children's books, you're always thinking of ideas as an editor or a designer. You know, personally for me, I work closely with lots of amazing authors, but often we'd be discussing ideas. I'd be feeding them ideas if they were getting a bit stuck or if they wanted a particular brief. There's also quite a lot of kind of rewriting involved, and almost like ghostwriting, I suppose you'd call it. But when you're an editor, it's done kind of in the background, in the shadows, and you know, there might be a pseudonym that you need to use, or you know, it's just considered part of the shaping of a story. So it was lovely when I went freelance a couple of years ago, had more sort of time and more headspace to think of my own story ideas, and you know, actually write some stories that would come out with my name attached to them. So that's been a great experience for me to do that.
Amazing. What was the first book that you had published by yourself? Well, that you wrote yourself. What was the first one that you wrote?
Well, in terms of when I was working in publishing companies, I did write some of the texts for some non-fiction titles when I was at HarperCollins. This is a blast from the past. We did a series called Fax Finders, which was FAX, and they were little books that were on sort of subjects like pirates, castles, fashion. I wrote quite a few of those, and they were called Fax Finders because they were designed to fit in a sort of like a Filofax style binder. You know, like nobody remembers what a Filofax is now.
Oh no, I'm sure I'm sure we had some. I'm sure my brother kind of had some of those when we were growing up.
Yeah.
And
So,
yeah, no, that's definitely a blast from the past in my head. I can remember having ones like that. It's
yeah,
amazing.
yes. So that, and then I did some other books, again under pseudonyms. But my first kind of sort of book since going freelance was actually Omar, the Bees and Me. So
My favourite.
and that one also came slightly from a slightly different route, because the publisher, who's called Sam Langley Swain at Owlet Press, he got in touch with me through a mutual contact that we had, and he knew that he wanted a book about bees and friendship, because I think he'd started on another project that didn't actually get off the ground, and he'd taken it to a book fair. I don't know if you know, if I need to explain what book fairs are.
Um, for our viewers, it'd be quite handy, yeah, if you could explain
Yeah.
what they are.
So there are these two major book fairs every year for selling rights in children's books. One is in Frankfurt in Germany, and one's in Bologna in Italy. And because books for children, colour books for children, picture books, are very, they cost a lot to produce, because they're full colour books. You've got the ink and the paper and all of the associated costs. And yet the number that you would print for, say, the UK might only be 2,000 or 3,000 copies, unless it's Julia Donaldson or somebody like that. So the way the model works, the financial model within publishing, is that countries such as the UK, the US, countries that create a lot of material and content, they will have a rights team whose job it is to sell the rights in these books to publishers around the world. And then they'll be translated into the appropriate language, and the books will all get printed on the press at the same time, and the colour pages will all get laid down, and then there'll be what's called a black plate change, where the black text is run through last, and there'll be the English edition, French edition, the German edition, the Korean edition, the whatever territory or language. And so you build up a kind of economies of scale. So I think Sam had taken this idea to Frankfurt Book Fair and had really good reception. Oh, we'd love to get a book about bees and sustainability and friendship. It's great. And then whatever project it was he was working on didn't happen. So I did have a bit of a brief for this title. I knew that it had to be about bees and it had to be about friendship. And there were a couple of other elements that he wanted sort of integrated into the story, but I was free to write my own story effectively. So, but I quite liked having that as my first book. It felt like somebody was holding my hand a bit, as a bit of guidance. So
you say it's such a beautifully written book. So you read it and it's just magical, and say it's brilliant. Even though you had, so you had a brief, but you were allowed to write it about whatever, how you wanted it to go, and it's beautiful because we've had it as our book of the month last year when it came out, because it was just one of our, we read it and was like, that's just a magical story. And it's not just a book, it's not just a book about bees and friendship. There is so much more to that book. So amazing.
well,
That's
thanks.
amazing that that's your first, one you fully wrote by yourself, and it's incredible. So amazing. And it's brilliant to find out about how the book fairs work, and and how the rights will work. So it's a brilliant explanation of that for our viewers. So you were saying about the books. How long did it take you to create the actual story?
Well, for Omar, I had the chat with Sam, and then I was mulling the idea for quite a long time. I think I spoke to him just before a Christmas break. So I was sort of thinking about it over Christmas, New Year, but without actually, sitting at the keyboard attempting to write it. And I find for me that's my best route into writing, is you just let it kind of simmer in the background. You're almost not thinking about it, but you kind of subconsciously are. whilst you're doing other things, other jobs, other editorial, freelance work, or even when you're just, driving or, doing other watching TV is just there. You just have this, allow something to simmer, but without trying to pin it down, because I always think it's a little bit like if you literally sit at your keyboard straight away, it's a bit like that thing when you wake up in the morning and somebody asks you if you had any dreams and can you remember what they are? And as soon as you try and remember them, capture them, they kind of evaporate. So I like to just let things kind of mull for a bit. And then when I did actually sit down to write it, I'm glad you asked me this question, because I sat down. I didn't start until about 8 o'clock one evening. I had one of those little mini bottles of Prosecco that somebody had given me at Christmas, I suppose. So I opened that up, got a straw, and I got the first draft down that evening. So the actual first draft I got down in a few hours. And I think because I'd found the voice that I wanted for the little girl. She was called Mabel in my original. Sam said, could we change her name to Maisie? And once I kind of got that voice and it from her point of view, and she's quite a sort of, I guess she's probably based on me as a small child. Then it kind of just flowed quite easily. And then obviously you go back, you leave it for a bit, you go back.
What you want. That's amazing. So then you say you wrote it and then you went back through it and then you make sort of draft, make changes and stuff to how you want it to.
Yeah, I kind of went back sort of in the cold light of day the next day, and then probably left it for about a week before I actually sent it through to Sam. Thinking, oh gosh, what's he going to say? And then when you send something through, you sort of, if you don't get instant feedback, which obviously you're not going to get, you start panicking and thinking, oh, it was rubbish, he hated it. So I don't think I heard from him for maybe a couple of weeks, and then, which if you were sending something into a big publisher, you wouldn't chase at that point, because they do take an age. We used to take an age to look at stuff at OUP, but because I knew he was a sort of one-man band, I sort of steeled myself just to send a little email, say, oh, just checking you got, and if you had any feedback or anything. And he said, oh, I love it, and I've shared it with this mutual person that we knew who was working with Sam as a kind of like a consultant for him setting up his new business. So then it all kind of sped along after that. And Sam's because it is just him, more or less. He just sees books through so quickly. He found the illustrator really quickly, and then she was able to work on it straight away. So it was quite a whirlwind, actually, compared to the normal publishing model of a lot of things going through, endless acquisition meetings and sort of group reactions to things and focus groups. And whereas this was quite refreshing, just working with Sam and banging it out.
You said obviously Katie Cottle is illustrator of this book. Was it you obviously when you saw images, was it how you imagined like Omar and Maisie to look like? Was it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd seen some samples of her work when Sam said, oh, I'm thinking of using Katie, and really loved her style. It's kind of loose, and it's kind of it's quite immediate and sort of kind of full of energy. It doesn't have she doesn't use outlines, which I think is lovely, because it really kind of, everything is quite profuse, especially when the flowers start growing. But also the way that the children move, I think, is lovely. So I don't think I had a fixed idea in my head as to what the individual kids in the story would look like. But in a way, because I wore glasses from a very young age, the fact that she put Maisie in glasses, it kind of made it, she's not dissimilar to how I looked as a 4 or 5 year old. So that was nice. Just kind of seemed like it was meant to be. And apologies everybody, because I've broken my arm, so I'm kind of trying to do this with one hand, but because I think this might be although it's the opening spread. Ooh, there's one side, there's the other. I think it actually might be my favorite hold it in the right place. My favourite spread, because the book starts with the children doing show and tell. So what's lovely in that first image is that there are so many like little unspoken stories behind every child that's standing there with their treasure or their object. And none of that came from me. That was all Katie. And there's so many instances of that in the book. She puts in all of these really authentic classroom details. And then there's on the same spread as well, Omar is remembering his I'm rubbish at this, granddad in his garden, quote unquote, a long way away. We never know exactly where it is, but you see him that he's remembering himself there as a younger boy, like as a toddler. And it's so clever because she's put him in the same kind of outfit. He's got a stripy top on and blue bottoms, but rather than it being a sweatshirt and long trousers when he's littler, he's got like a short sleeve t-shirt on and shorts. And that's just a really neat visual shorthand for children to kind of recognize it's the same little boy, but that he looks younger, he looks different.
It's a beautiful, beautiful like image about we would say at the beginning. It just grips you from the start. You just want to carry on reading and seeing what happens in the story.
Yeah, and then of course her flowers are just gorgeous. And if you Google her, she's got a video on YouTube where she shows you how she paints her flowers and draws her flowers, which is a really nice thing for adults and children. Yeah, you're quicker than me. Yeah, just really wild and just full of like happiness and joy.
Definitely, it's a beautiful, beautiful book, and so your partnership of illustrator and writer is just beautiful together.
Oh, thanks. Well, that's down to Sam for making the pairing. So that it's great, and I'm really thrilled. I'm going to be I am working on another one with her. So
we're very excited. I'm very, very excited. So obviously, like Maisie and Omar had a really magical friendship in the book. When you created them, did you what was it that made it so special together? Does that make sense? Like,
sorry, you broke up a bit there. Sorry, you broke up.
So just talking about like Maisie. So with Maisie and Omar, they've got a really beautiful friendship together. Why do you think it was so magical? Like how you wrote it, how you wrote it was just incredible. And that's not really a question, but it's just a magical like.
Yeah, I did think about that.
And it's
I've got some notes somewhere because I did think about it. Oh yeah, here we go. So I didn't want to make it overt in the story where Omar has come from, or his background necessarily, and we just learn that his grandfather kept bees and lived a long way away. And although we see Omar with his grandpa in his garden, we don't know whether did he live with him there. Maybe he was just on holiday. So there's no kind of cut and dried backstory for Omar. And I wanted that because I wanted it to be as applicable as possible to all kinds of readers. They might find something in Omar's in how they encounter Omar, and they'll find parallels between how he is and how they are potentially. He's quite a shy personality. And all I wanted to say about him was that he was new in the class, because that is a big thing. If you start in a class and you've maybe started at a slightly different time to all the other children, it's that needing to integrate. I mean, children are really generally open and not judgmental, and they'll just accept new things in a much better way than most adults would. But I just wanted there to be a catalyst for that, and that's where where Maisie came in, because I wanted her to be the one to be kind of empathetic enough and perceptive enough to notice that Omar's a bit shy, and to think, oh gosh, my grandpa keeps bees as well, and to make that first overture of friendship towards him. So, and I think I was also remembering when I was in primary school and infant school, there was a girl who started in our class like mid-year, and she actually was in a children, you know, in those days they had these NCH, National Children's Homes. So she was in, you know, in care. And so it made things slightly, I'm sure it's not the same these days, but I just remember I wanted her to come and play with me after school one day, and there had to be this whole lot of kind of paperwork associated with that, which you kind of don't understand when you're a kid.
Yeah, you sort of come play, don't you?
Friends. So I think there's an element of me thinking about that. I mean, obviously it's not about that, but it sort of informed how I wrote the story, I guess.
Amazing. What's my next question for you? So you said that you're doing a new book, which you said you're currently in the process of. Could you tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, so it's definitely in the same sort of area, in that it's about children and it's about nature, and it's also got a title that sort of follows the sort of pattern established by Omar, the Bees and Me, in that it's called Enzo, the Swallows and Me. But this time it's two boys, and it's narrated by Jack, who nominally lives in this country. Again, it's not really made specific. And Enzo has come with his family because his dad's got a job, but he's from Southern Africa. And so it's kind of exploring the friendship between these two boys, and their common interests, and the fact that Enzo's dad, who's a keen bird watcher, gets them both into bird watching. But their friendship, or at least their proximity as friends, is quite short-lived, because Enzo's father is then going back to Southern Africa, so the family goes back. So although, you know, they've made friends, obviously there's going to be a separation. And so I wanted that as a sort of storyline, because I think it's an important thing for children to see reflected in stories, because it does happen. But also I wanted to think of something from the natural world that would sit alongside that. So I came up with swallows, because of course they migrate, they make these massive journeys. And it was a way of there being this amazing connection between the two boys, even when they are thousands of miles apart, because the swallows actually have a migratory route that comes from sub-Saharan Africa up into Northern Europe. So, and also they, in the book, in the story, they're quite into their gadgets and their sort of geeky stuff. So they've got sort of webcams in the nesting box, so they're able to kind of stay in touch through the power of technology, which obviously is another thing which is a big deal these days, especially, you know, particularly after the pandemic and everything, the way, all of these different ways to keep in touch, even if you're not physically together. So
that sounds amazing. And do you know roughly when it's due out?
I should do, shouldn't I? I can't. I think it's this year. I think it might be in the autumn.
Amazing. I will keep an eye on that, because I am very excited to read it.
Yeah.
I know my little boy is happy to get it too.
And another thing that Katie has done is that there's one scene, it's not set in a school, it's mainly set in the boys' kind of back gardens and homes. But there's one scene when they're leaving school one afternoon in the playground, and we get to see Maisie and Omar. They're just background characters in the playground. So if you have read the first book, you'll recognise them, but it's not important if you haven't. So
fantastic. That sounds so exciting to hear about your new book. I'm really looking forward to that. Sorry, I'm coming fast. So yeah, no, really looking forward to that new book. I will be getting my hands on that when it comes out. So as an author, what do you think we can do as parents to encourage our children to read more?
Sorry, it just broke up again a bit there.
So what do you think as an author we could do as parents to help encourage our children to read more?
I think, well, just reading with them is really important. I know everybody's incredibly busy, but having that time to share books and to sort of um, allow really young children to understand the specialness of books, that there is time set aside, a particular time of day. Because there might be books that you just play, board books and things that are scattered around the living room or attached to a buggy or whatever. And that's great. But also to have that sort of almost like reverence for reading, and there being a moment in the day when you both really get something magical from a story together. Obviously going to your library, I think is, it's such a brilliant thing to have libraries. And just for children to see you reading as well as an adult, just for it to be a kind of normalized activity within the family. I think that's anything you can do to kind of promote the environment where they will just feel like they want to read, not feel like they're being forced to read. Because I think once you get to school and you start going through endless Biff, Chip and Kipper, reading becomes something else. It doesn't necessarily become a pleasure, but it's hard work. And yeah, obviously you've got to learn how to read, and that is a bit of a nightmare. But just somehow keeping alive that sense of the joy and the pleasure from books in the home. I think if you can do that, then it's brilliant.
I know for me, my little boy, so he reads his school book, Biff and Chip, whatever one he's got at the time, every day with me. But then we'll sit together and we'll read a book, just the two of us together. We'll curl up together, TV's off, and we'll just sit together and we'll read. And he's now at a point where he can help me read the books as well. So he's actually interested in the books that he wants to read. So, which is brilliant. As an author, what do you think you could do what would you say to aspiring authors what would you say to them to help them to be successful as authors?
I think if you want to write stories for any audience, I think having a notebook and jotting down just ideas, phrases, random thoughts, things that you overhear, and they don't have to be coherent in any way. If you don't write them down, you'll forget them, and then you've got a sort of resource. You haven't got like the blank page moment where you're thinking, gosh, what am I going to write about? Or even if it's not the ideas themselves, you've got something to help you with a character, or the way they speak, the kind of how they behave. So yeah, don't be afraid just to have it with you all the time. Tiny little notebook in your bag when you go out. And I mean, obviously you've still got to then write the stories, and for me, it's probably easier to write a 32-page book than somebody sitting down with the prospect of writing an adult novel. But I'm sure that the process is similar. Is like you need to have that bank of material, the raw material. It's like something that you can mine from. It's like having your seam of precious metal, and then you can go and chip away at it and make it into something amazing. So
amazing. Okay, thank you so much for that. It's brilliant. So as it is Independent Book Week, we are so thankful for any of all our customers, our authors we support, our publishers we support. For you as an author, and as a publisher and editor, why do you love independent bookshops so much?
I think it's because they have such an independent bookshop kind of has a personality. When you go inside, you can almost feel the particular passions of the bookshop owner. They might have a particular focus on children's books, or they might love cookery, or it's kind of a curated, I know that's a word that people use a lot these days, but it's a kind of personally curated selection of books.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have that supermarket feel, which unfortunately the chains now have. you know, they might as well be selling spaghetti or packets of flour or something as books, because everything is displayed in the same way, whichever Waterstones you go into, pretty much. And the decisions are made at head office. The books are kind of ranked according to top 10 or squeezed into certain bays because they have to be. And I understand that, you know, there's always got to be a place for chain bookshops because they do shift a lot of titles, but there's just they don't have for me, they don't have the magic.
The magic special
Like any shop, any independent shop, isn't it? I guess you know, either you go to Sainsbury's or you go to some lovely little deli somewhere and discover these things that you never even knew, you didn't know what they were. And that's the same with a bookshop. I mean, more so because stories are such unique things. They're not like they're expressions of, every single story is the expression of somebody's character, the writer's character. So yeah, I love them. And I'm very lucky to have really, you know, there's lots around near where I live. So
you know, we feel very lucky as a online bookshop, but we spend our time choosing books that we think that our parents who shop with us and the children who they live with enjoy their books, and say Omar, Bees and Meads was one of the ones that we love, and it's very close to our hearts as books. So thank you so much. A lot of our people who've been watching, Simone has said, we absolutely love this book so much. Karen has said, I bet you've had ideas during the night, getting up and having to write them before you forget. Eden said it's one of her favourite books. So we have, as I say, a lot of love for your books here at ESBB, and we're very excited to see your next one. Before we go, is there anything else you would like to say?
Well, just thank you very much for inviting me, and you know, it's lovely that you've got this community around your online store, and you know, that's another joy of kind of being an independent retailer of any kind, is that you can build those relationships with your customers and like talk about the things that you love to sell or love to consume. So I think that's great. And, you know, I shall definitely be looking to see what other titles you're you know, take those as recommendations, because when somebody's gone to the effort of, you know, making specific choices, I think that's a really, really good way to discover new titles to share with friends who've got kids and things. So
thank you so much, and we really do appreciate your time today, and we can't wait for your next book to come out. So it will be on my doorstep as soon as it comes out. So thank you ever so much, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your independent book week. I know you said you can't go out and do what you were planning to do, but I hope you do have a lovely week, and I hope our customers all enjoy themselves, and our followers and our lovely community enjoy their week. And thank you for celebrating Book Week with us. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.